11,000 tons of toxic chemicals illegally stored in a massive warehouse. It sounds like an impossible scenario, but when it detonates with the force of a nuclear bomb, it's a reminder the unthinkable might be hiding in your backyard. The apocalyptic blast goes viral overnight, and one question echoes across the globe. How could this happen? The truth reveals a twisted web of lies and corruption that's so inexcusable, it forces the Chinese Communist Party to turn on its own members. On a sweltering summer evening in Tianjin port, dock workers are in overdrive. The massive site is the economic gateway to Beijing, with connections to titans in every industry. As a result, Tianjin's one of the busiest ports in the world, so cargo handlers work around the clock to meet tight shipping schedules. One of the companies fueling this trade is Ruhai Logistics, who owns a facility the size of 10 football fields. They only gained the right to move dangerous goods a few months earlier. However, Ruhai has already been processing dangerous chemicals for over a year, and its workers aren't trained to handle them safely. Their lack of knowledge means flammable chemicals are stacked close to explosives, and the company stores far greater amounts than regulations allow. Despite the blatant violations, they have recently passed a state inspection, so on the night of August 12th, its staff processes shipments as usual. But as they add to the endless stacks of containers, they have no idea a disaster is brewing. In the Ruhai arrival zone, 27 tons of gun cotton sits in steel cargo boxes, waiting to be processed. It's a highly flammable compound. It should be stored moist and cool. But instead, it's been baking in scorching sunlight for days. After reaching heights of 150 degrees Fahrenheit or 65 degrees Celsius, a container suddenly ignites. Workers notice the fire a few minutes later and immediately call emergency services. Expecting a routine blaze, 8 fire trucks rush to the scene, but the warehouse gates are locked when they arrive, and Ruhai staff are nowhere to be found. Frustratingly, they are forced to watch from outside as the fire consumes more containers. When they finally gain entry to the site, they're met by rising plumes of thick black smoke and a foul smell in the air. An entire stack of containers has burst into flames. As the fire crews push forward, the brigade commander becomes concerned. His team is surrounded by steel boxes, which could ignite at any second. So he asks Ruhai's staff what's inside them, but no one gives him a straight answer or even mentions the warehouse is full of dangerous chemicals. Meanwhile, fire trucks try to reach the blaze, but they face a near impossible task. The facility's roads are narrow at best, and they're obstructed by a maze of oddly stacked containers. After failing to clear a path, firefighters switch strategy. Using water cannons, they start cooling nearby containers, hoping to prevent the blaze from spreading. But the attempt is futile. No matter how hard they try, the flames only grow hotter, until responders fear their gear can't last much longer. Realizing the danger to his team, the brigade commander orders everyone to retreat to a safe distance and calls for reinforcements. But by the time additional crews wade into the inferno, firefighters face an unstoppable chain reaction. Flames leap across containers, igniting volatile chemicals which fuel the fire's spread. Within moments, it reaches highly flammable liquids, and they erupt in a bright flash. Working in unison, firefighters set up supply lines and begin drenching everything in sight with water and foam. Their only option from this point onwards is to protect the local area. But the responders don't realize they're creating an even greater crisis. The chemicals they're spraying react violently with water, generating a dangerous buildup of pressurized gases. As they empty their tanks, they begin to hear ominous popping noises coming from the smoldering containers. Unaware of the warning signs, they battle the blaze until it spreads to the main storage area. This is where the most dangerous substances are stored, and it's consumed by a searing wall of heat with terrifying speed. Seeing that thousands of containers are aflame, firefighters widen the safety zone to include surrounding buildings. and they order a mass evacuation. However, while people flee to safety, temperatures inside the warehouse soar past 200 degrees. 800 tons of explosive fertilizer is decomposing. Suddenly, fire crews feel a deep tremor beneath their feet, and a massive explosion rocks the main warehouse, registering as a 2.3 magnitude earthquake. It sends shards of molten steel flying in every direction as hundreds of shipping containers explode in an instant. Firefighters nearest to the blast are covered in a cloud of toxic chemicals, and the warehouse creaks on unsteady foundations. Dazed and confused, some look for an escape route as the building collapses around them. But 30 seconds later, an even larger, deafening blast tears through the site. In an instant, a gigantic fireball erupts into the air, painting the night sky orange. The force of the blast vaporizes fire trucks, and the shockwave carves through Tianjin, shattering windows up to 6 miles away. Seismologists later registered the explosion as a 2.9 magnitude earthquake with a maximum force of 400 tons of TNT, equivalent to a small nuclear bomb. In the chaos that follows, rescuers scramble to find trapped survivors, but the city is unrecognizable. Entire neighborhoods are gone. The air is thick with smoke and ash, and flaming debris rains around them. The explosion also incinerates thousands of newly manufactured cars. Their burning carcasses act as tinder and ignite any remaining chemicals beyond the initial inferno area. Emergency responders are given barely any information. They don't know where the blast began, or that there's a risk of exposure to lethal substances. Still, first responders do their best to contain the firestorm and slowly evacuate hundreds of citizens throughout the night. An anxious energy hangs over Tianjin the following morning. Entire apartment buildings have been destroyed, and people fear the death toll could be in the thousands. Their concerns only grow when a large group of soldiers arrive to search the wasteland of burning rubble. Meanwhile, paramedics discover thousands of homeless residents have worrying symptoms, including skin irritation and breathing difficulties from inhaling toxic fumes. Their complaints are shared by rescuers, as it leads emergency services to suspect chemicals were involved in the explosion. Needing expert knowledge, a team of chemical warfare specialists arrive in the afternoon to investigate further. What they find is extremely alarming. The air around the site contains several harmful gases, including ammonia, sulfur dioxide, and phosgene, an ingredient used in chemical weapons. However, the worst results come from water that's filling the blast crater. It holds over 8,000 times more cyanide than the safe drinking limit, and the tests spark panic that the entire area is a death trap. Realizing the scale of the contamination, authorities swiftly seal all drains and sewers to prevent a poisonous runoff. They also build barriers around the entire site to protect the public from anything else that might be hiding in the wreckage. And sure enough, the chemical teams quickly discover 700 tons of cyanide scattered in the area. They immediately begin spraying it with a neutralizing solution, but with many more chemicals still unidentified, they have a daunting task on their hands. With an environmental crisis unfolding, the Chinese government tries to downplay the explosion's effects, but there's nowhere to hide. The blast wipes out so much cargo it disrupts global supply chains, drawing a storm of international attention. The mounting pressure forces officials to promise a public investigation, and everyone asks a pressing question. Exactly what was Ruhai storing inside the warehouse? The next day, Ruhai finally releases an inventory report, but it only confirms their mismanagement. Most documents were destroyed in the explosion, and the company has no backups to complete a full ledger. Needing concrete answers, investigators interview senior Ruhai staff and use customs records to fill in the blanks. Their estimates, at least 3,500 tons of chemicals are stored at the facility. But this could rise to a total of 11,300 tons. The revelation sparks outrage among thousands of displaced locals who learn disturbing details in a government press conference. During the meeting, locals learn of at least 40 official confirmed deaths, yet residents weren't warned of volatile chemicals stored close to their homes. Worse still, the explanations they receive are vague and offer little reassurance. As frustration mounts, reporters press officials for answers, but authorities abruptly end the meeting and cut its live stream. Unsurprisingly, their dismissive attitude sparks rumors of corruption online, and discussions about the explosion trends across Chinese social media platforms. With no reliable information coming from the state, journalists begin scrutinizing the disaster firsthand. A few days later, they reveal a worrying detail. In an undercover report, a policeman reveals authorities are quietly moving bodies from the blast zone and deliberately feeding false death tolls to the Chinese press. When the news breaks, the government's credibility crumbles in an instant. Hot on the trail of a potential cover-up, journalists dig deeper, but they immediately hit a brick wall. Ruhai's website has mysteriously shut down. Its registration records aren't accessible, and public databases suddenly vanish. It's as if someone is trying to erase its very existence. Then comes another bombshell. The Ruhai facility was built illegally. It stood just 500 meters from homes, schools, and a nursery, half the distance required by law. Yet, the state approved its construction and allowed it to open in 2012. However, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Ruhai's history eventually becomes public knowledge, which allows the media to reveal a shocking truth. The company never had a license to store chemicals. A year before the explosions, the company gained temporary permission to move chemicals inside the port, under strict conditions that they couldn't store them. But it immediately broke this agreement and stockpiled chemicals inside its own facility. To make matters worse, Ruhai continued doing this after its chemical handling license expired. So officials knew Ruhai was storing chemicals illegally when they passed its inspection a few months before the disaster. For displaced homeowners, this is the final straw. Already incensed, they take to the streets, demanding the state purchase their destroyed properties. But officials refuse, claiming residents approved the site in a community survey. It's a blatant lie, and people fear they'll never see justice. Just as their anger reaches its peak, Greenpeace turns the situation on its head when it releases a report on the explosion. According to them, at least 2 more warehouses store chemicals in Tianjin, and they're built even closer to residential areas than the Ruhai site. But the most damaging part of the report concerns the site's owners. Both companies have links to the Sinochem Corporation, a powerful chemical handler owned by the Chinese Communist Party. When taken at face value, the links to Sinochem only prove the government's disregard for building codes. But it soon becomes crucial when the media learns of a man named Xi Feng. As Ruhai's manager at the time of the explosion, he had a hand in the decisions that caused the disaster. Investigators later realize he has links to high-ranking CCP officials, including working for Sinochem in the past. Beyond Feng, it turns out the company owners also have links to senior members of the government. It's hard to tell who actually owns the company, but 2 men stand out as main beneficiaries: Dan Sejuan and Yu Jue. Dan is the son of Tianjin's port chief security officer, with access to hundreds of port and customs workers. Thanks to these contacts, Ruhai's senior leaders bribed dozens of officials, allowing 49,000 tons of chemicals to be stored illegally. In their greed, virtually every chemical handling regulation was ignored, and some of its staff didn't even know the company stored chemicals at all. It's a miracle the warehouse didn't explode either. When the investigation results come to light, President Xi Jinping responds decisively. Over a 4-week period, streams of officials received convictions for the slightest connection with the scandal. The most high-profile of these is Yu Jue, chairman of Ruhai Logistics. He receives a suspended death sentence for paying out millions of dollars in bribes. To most, it seems like the government is cleaning up its act, but critics argue it's just trying to save face, a claim that later developments seem to support. Ruhai is permanently shut down following the arrests, having caused damages of up to $6 billion. It makes the explosion one of the costliest in modern history. But despite the company's closure and criminal convictions, many are left angry in the blast's aftermath. After a tense battle, the CCP eventually announces it will purchase destroyed properties at above-market rates. But there were delays in receiving payment, and rising property prices meant many were left out of pocket. Unsurprisingly, the government didn't assess its response to the disaster at all. Instead, it used its official mouthpiece, the People's Daily newspaper, to praise the brave efforts of rescuers and heavily censored CCP detractors. The police physically stopped news reporters from covering the incident, and thousands of social media accounts were deleted for posting about the incident. So many still believe the government has something to hide. And on that topic, it's unclear how much of the chemical spillage has been cleared. At the time of writing, official reports claim the area is contamination-free. However, the cleanup operation allegedly ground to a halt over time. Environmental activists claim very few updates were made on the decontamination effort, and the companies involved didn't respond to emails or phone calls. Either way, Ruhai site is now an ecological park, and with a secretive government in power, it's likely we'll never know how safe the site really is. Thanks to the blasé attitude to safety, Chinese citizens are at an even greater risk today than they were in 2015. So it's possible we'll see a repeat of the explosions, which injured 798 people and claimed 173 lives, a death toll that's still disputed. Watch this episode next if you found this video interesting. Please add a like and leave a comment if you want to support the channel.